Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out. My name is Zachary. Welcome. I'm the programs coordinator here at the Northeast Harbor Library. Please take this opportunity to silence your phones if you haven't done so already. The library is able to offer free programs like this year-round, thanks to the generosity of our donors and thanks to our community of artists, writers, and educators. Coming up at this time tomorrow, MDI author Paul Weiss shares his poetry celebrating aging and exploring the greater meaning of a life. And next Wednesday, August 13th, we're collaborating with the Mount Desert Island Historical Society for a presentation on the relationship between colonial Mount Desert Island and the Caribbean slave trade through the lens of culinary history. So to hear more about that and all of our upcoming programs, you can sign up for a newsletter at the table at the back of the room. We also do have some books for sale and a table set up in the lobby for signing after the event. Tonight's presenter is an orthopedic surgeon and the chief medical correspondent for MSNBC's Morning Show, examining systemic abuses in addiction treatment. He's a retired U.S. Army Reserve Medical Corps major, the former assistant professor of orthopedic surgery at the University of Florida, and most recently the co-author of Fighting the Florida Shuffle, the inside story of corruption in the drug treatment industry and how one community found the solution. Please welcome Dr. David Aronberg.
And former rugby player and not a soccer player. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Katrina, for thinking of this and kind of nudging me along to show up and do this. And I do appreciate that, Mark. So tonight is going to be rather low key because I believe that everybody here will have some thoughts and some experiences for people they know or have known of. There's really nobody that's not been affected by substance use disorders. I'm not going to talk about alcohol tonight too much, but we are going to talk about substance use disorders involving drugs, and really opioids have been the drugs that have had most impact in the United States over the past, say, 25 years or so. And as an orthopedic surgeon, trauma surgeon, spine surgeon in particular, I was a spine surgeon. Most everybody that came to my office had pain for 35 years. So needing to know how to manage that pain other than just with an operation has been and remains a part of every spine surgeon, neurosurgeon, and orthopedic surgeon to a certain extent practice. So I didn't start out thinking that I would team up with our state attorney to write about corruption in the industry in Palm Beach County, because there really wasn't any back when I started, 91. OxyContin didn't exist yet. The federal laws that allowed, let's say, greedy or unscrupulous healthcare providers or business people to take advantage of some of the laws, they might have been there, but they didn't have a platform for their greed. But they did once we had the beginning of and then a continuation of the opioid crisis that started in the, say, mid-90s, by 2000s. I think everybody here probably read about it, heard about it, knows about it. And in South Florida, where I'm from, Delray Beach in particular has been an epicenter for drug and alcohol treatment for decades now. It's beautiful, the beaches are nice, the like-minded businesses brought in more like-minded businesses. So for decades, even before, as I was going to medical school, I would hear of places like Hanley, Hazleton, Delray Beach. My dad, back when I was in high school, was the chief of police. I never heard of any of this stuff. I just knew from hearing discussions around the dinner table that and back then there was a lot of stigma attached to it, maybe still now, but my dad would talk about people addicted to drugs or the crime that came with it, and how thankfully it wasn't much in our small town of Green Acres, Florida, near Lake Worth. It's not really the case now. Lake Worth, Delray, Boynton, Lantana, those are names that pop up in the news all the time because of the problems that have developed in this industry. The reason I handed out the figures is so you can have something to look at, because the understanding the problem of drug addiction, which now is better described as a substance use disorder. That's what we use the term to describe drug addiction nowadays. It's a little complicated. There's a lot of mental health overlay with substance use disorders. The whole field of behavioral healthcare involves mental health problems, mental illness, and substance use disorders. They bind it into behavioral health treatment. But everyone here will have a different level of experience or understanding how a human can develop an addiction. We're going to mostly concentrate on drugs because that's where the money has been for the unscrupulous doctors and business people who rather rapidly identified a deep pocket of money in the health insurance industry that was enabled to be available by some of the federal laws that we talk about in this book, that all of which you'll know a little bit about. So before President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act in 2010, the corruption in the industry, it really didn't exist to the extent that it did 5 years later. The Affordable Care Act opened up some more expanded requirements for treatment for substance use disorders, and it also made it easier for people to have access to treatment. We all know, everybody here is over 20, perhaps. Health insurance in your family plan can now be expanded so that your kids can stay insured until they're at least 26. Substance use disorders, or addiction, as we might call it for short, became an essential health benefit. So in the Affordable Care Act, as it kicked in from 2010 when President Obama signed it, until say 2013 or 14 when those parts of the bill became implemented, it also made it so that the treatment of addiction was without any pre-existing conditions. It made it so there were no yearly or lifetime limits on the treatment of addiction. And at least in Palm Beach County, it allowed the homes that people go to after they go through inpatient treatment, that I'll let you read through it yourself, but you go to a home after inpatient treatment called sober home. In my era, I graduated high school in '76. It was a halfway house. I didn't know this recovery house name. I don't know when that came, but my dad called them halfway houses. They're now recovery homes or recovery residences or sober homes. So by 2013, 2014, the Affordable Care Act was kicking in, no lifetime limits. Everybody had access to treatment, including private health insurance. So the Affordable Care Act, even though it's a federal law, told private health insurance companies, you have to provide benefits to people with this particular brain disease. Some of the other laws confirmed that addiction is a disability. So now you have disabled person with a brain disease with unlimited access to treatment, a condition that affects everybody, but really if you're say 15 to 25, that's the prime time for early drug misuse to transition into maybe mild substance use disorder, and then it gets worse over time, and it varies person to person, of course. So by the time the Affordable Care Act matured, as I would say 2014, the insurance companies were caught flat-footed. They didn't expect this to happen. They were kind of with what we call insurance largesse. They were just handing out the money, paying for services like they did if I operated on somebody. They pay you for your service. And then with addiction treatment, in part because there's a disability attached to it, made them a little bit afraid to be too aggressive. So they would typically pay the bill and then if need be, try to claw it back like they do with Medicare. You've heard how insurance companies can try to claw the money back. So now we're around 2014 and pockets of suspicion were starting to show up both in the law enforcement agencies, particularly in Palm Beach County, where again, we had Delray Beach, which was the epicenter for treatment. Now more and more addiction treatment facilities were opening up. There were not and still are not any particular limits on who can own an addiction treatment facility. And there definitely aren't any restrictions on who can own a sober home. You can decide tomorrow you want to start both and fill out the paperwork and likely be registered and able to provide care. So what this book describes is how around 2016 or so, 2017, coincidentally, when my younger brother died of a fentanyl overdose, it's not really the trigger for me writing this book. I'd written a book a couple years before that, which is a prevention handbook for parents, the teen formula, to try to avoid having their kids have substance use disorders. Then my brother died. Coincidentally, I also, thanks to Mika and Joe, ran into Dave Aronberg, my co-author. And he and I hit it off quite nicely in 2016 and 2017, talking on the show. And this topic was always top of mind. For Dave Aronberg, since 2001, he had been fighting the opioid epidemic. And here by 2016, his county, where he's the state attorney until very recently, had the worst of the worst players in this corrupt industry bringing patients down. When this 2016 era was happening, 75% of the kids coming for treatment in Palm Beach County were from out of state. Further adding to the lucrative nature of this corrupt scheme to recruit typically young people to come to Florida for treatment, often with kickbacks being paid from the treatment facility to the referring person, from the doc. There were some bad doctors then, there probably still are now, but there were some terrible doctors in Palm Beach County back then that paid money to get patients, and then the labs would send kickbacks to the doctors, to the treatment facilities. It was one big ugly scheme that was happening in Palm Beach County. So Dave Aronberg and I talked about it a lot because he was the one in Palm Beach County who took the lead across the country in trying to stop this particular corrupt health insurance fraud scheme from happening. He did it in Palm Beach County. He and some of his partners in the state attorney's office have tried to extend their knowledge and experience to other states with variable success. So we decided about 2017 or so that we were going to investigate this, and he kind of assigned me and I kind of assigned him different roles, since he was a lawyer and an elected politician and I'm a doctor with essentially no experience other than prescribing pain pills, and having a brother who was both in alcohol and long-term chronic opioid therapy / addicted to opioids patient. Kind of goes hand in hand in some people. So we decided that we would try to get the message out in whatever way we thought we could do that best, besides talking with Mika and Joe on the show, or writing the occasional report or article. And Aronberg went a couple times to Congress to testify on this. Not much was happening because of that, or he thought at the time. So we worked on this book, doing a lot of interviews, a lot of discussions, a lot of planning to try to make an understandable statement about this, the problem that was developed in Palm Beach County, to see if we would do some good, both in the county and across the country. Handed you these two pieces of paper so you have a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about besides me describing it. The Florida model in theory. This is the model of addiction treatment that has been put in place and been the party line in Florida for quite some time. And you see how it starts with somebody that has addiction. Again, 3/4 of them from out of state come to Florida for care, to either typically go through what's called detox or detoxification, where they come in and are terribly with all of the hallmarks of a drug addiction, whether it's cravings or compulsions or obsessions, loss of control. And they go into an inpatient facility and they get medications typically that help ease the cravings and eases the first week or so of treatment. And then they may stay in treatment for another week or two, maybe 6 at the most. As long as they have health insurance and as long as the health insurance stays intact. That patient will typically then go to outpatient care. If they're still very sick, it may be in what's called intensive outpatient program, where they really could have stayed as an inpatient, but insurance wouldn't pay for it anymore, so they go to an outpatient facility, but they're still pretty sick, but they have to live somewhere. So they go to a sober home or halfway house. So far, everything would be fine, except that the typical inpatient treatment facility payment is about $40,000 per kid who rotates through that, say, 2 weeks or 6 weeks of care. It varies, of course. And it's much more if it's an out-of-network payment. You guys all know what out-of-network is. Of course, everybody does. Out-of-network, the doctor makes more money. In network, you take a haircut, like with Medicare and all of the in-network payers that we work with. So they want out-of-state kids to come in. Then they stay in the sober home. Sober home's supposed to be sober. It's supposed to be like-minded people. You're not supposed to drink alcohol or take drugs or get in trouble when you're staying in the sober home. And then the stated goal, even the goal of many of the patients and kids that are there, is to get sober, go into recovery, and stay into recovery. Maybe half of it, in a perfect world, with the statistics as I know them, maybe half of those kids would go through this treatment program and stay sober off of opioids. Opioids are tough. So the numbers vary a great deal, but let's say it's half. They stay sober, everybody's happy. The problem is that's where the money ends for the treatment facility, the detox facility, the outpatient facility, and the sober homes. So now we enter into this whole big picture. The tip of the spear of this whole Florida shuffle, illegal patient insurance scheme that has kickbacks built into it. Enter the patient broker. So the patient broker is what drives this whole corrupted, unscrupulous business model. Patient brokers are called body brokers. I've seen them called body snatchers, but they're the middlemen who are marketing, perhaps online, with phone calls, with social media, with networks. There's networks out there to this day where the patient broker has somebody, say, out of state, and money's flowing back and forth, much of it never seen, to get the kid to come from whatever state they're in when they show up in the ER, or when they show up in the jail, or when they're arrested for something else, to get them to come down to the facility they want them to come to. Because if the patient goes to the wrong facility, the broker loses control, loses money, and then that whole scheme falls apart. Enter the next brochure. This is the model of the Florida Shuffle as it actually happens. And you must know that this is thankfully still the minority of episodes of treatment that are happening, particularly in Palm Beach County, but elsewhere, because there's tens of thousands of treatment facilities in the United States today. Most of them aren't bad. Most of them don't want to go to prison. The owners like their freedom, and they are often psychiatrists, social workers, internal medicine doctors, business people with some experience, many of them with a substance use disorder history, not so much the doctors as much as the people who are running the facilities or working in the outpatient programs. They don't want to go to jail. So they are running things legitimately, doing their best in a very difficult arena, which is treating kids with addiction. I'll bet you everybody in here has had to deal with somebody, whether if it was alcohol for sure, but if it's whether it's cocaine, methamphetamine, opioids, pain pills, then heroin, now fentanyl. It's a terrible, terrible change in that person's personality that happens. And so the Florida Shuffle is describing to you how it actually happens, and in an effort to learn how to make it stop. So if you see up here at the top of this kind of similar looking model, once the person is flown down from out of state typically, and they go to detox or they go to inpatient rehab, maybe no money's changed hands yet, but it actually probably has, if it's a repeat customer. Then from detox, they spend 2 weeks to 6 weeks and they go to outpatient care. Money changes hands back and forth. Then they flip over and they go to the sober home. Money changes hands back and forth. And if the business model is corrupted. If they go to sobriety, meaning they're in recovery and they haven't relapsed, nobody gets paid. So in this insurance fraud scheme, the goal is to take this kid who is finishing with treatment, often because the insurance company has said, while we know you have no lifetime benefits and no yearly restrictions, you can only have 6 weeks of treatment, for example, or 4 weeks, and then your benefits are done. So they go through the sober home. As soon as the benefits are done, they have to go live somewhere, and they're no longer in treatment, and there's no longer any money flowing from the insurance company back to feed this system. That's when the recently recovered, typically young person, is most vulnerable, and in come the predators, the patient brokers, to prey on these kids. And they do it in Palm Beach County still, and they do it in California, and they do it in Arizona, and they do it elsewhere. to pick off these kids and entice them to re-enroll in detox or inpatient treatment. But you can't just automatically re-enroll in detox treatment. You have to prove that you're addicted again, that you're using drugs again. So they send them to the lab to pee so that they can look for the drugs in the urine. Except if there's no drug in the urine, they're not going to qualify to be re-enrolled in detox and addiction treatment. So the broker will give the prey cash or drugs. Cash, go buy your own drugs. Here's some drugs, you want to go do it. And then as soon as you take your drugs, go pee in a cup at such and such lab, where the lab tends to bill inflated charges. Back, it was really bad 10 years ago, so that you can have a drug metabolite in your system. You're now using again, you re-enroll in treatment. You re-enroll in treatment for a couple of weeks, you're going to get Suboxone, which is buprenorphine and Narcan. Makes them feel better. It's not horrible. They don't go through the jonesing, as they used to call it, or the feeling sick, as it's now described. They re-enroll. And it's this cycle that was happening in 2015, 2016, that Dave Aronberg and his partners in the state attorney's office were trying to stop. Florida passed some laws in 2017, thanks to Aronberg. The feds passed a law in 2018, the ECRA Act, the Ending Kickback and Recovery Act. So it wasn't like nothing was being done, but the whole time, insurance companies were kind of slow to investigate, and kids were dying. The overdose death rate has been going up. A little blip of improvement a couple of years ago, but I just literally today read that little blip of declining overdose death rate may have ended. And now we may see that whatever caused it to be a little better here in the US for the last couple of years may have just been spurious. It may, but we definitely can't let your guard down. So from 2018, they say, to now, Palm Beach County, they've arrested and convicted way over 100 people. I just read that within the last 3 months, California put somebody in prison for 42 months. They just arrested a treatment CEO for some like $100 million scheme a week or two ago. In Arizona, you know, it's happening all over, and it's no longer just in the South and these beautiful places to come do rehab with coconut trees and nice weather in California or Arizona. I don't know why people go to Arizona, but it seems hot to me, but that's where they also tended to go. So this problem has not gone away. And Aronberg, Dave Aronberg, who was the first person in the country to investigate Purdue Pharma back in 2001. He was assigned the task when he went to Harvard, got out, did a couple of years in corporate law, hated it. So he always knew he was going to be a public servant. So he became an assistant attorney general in Florida, got assigned by then Attorney General Bob Butterworth to investigate this thing happening in Appalachia with this company called Purdue Pharma that are doing crazy marketing schemes for this long-acting drug called OxyContin. So he assigned that to Aronberg in 2001. So Aronberg started the investigations, and then being Dave Aronberg decided, well, I don't like being assistant attorney general. I want to be a state senator. So he ran and won, which took him off task. So now he's doing whatever state senators do in Florida. He was good at it. And he didn't like drop the ball on fighting the Florida shuffle, but it really hadn't happened yet. Purdue Pharma was doing what Purdue Pharma has done, making billions of dollars and feeding and fueling the number of mostly young people, but not only, that were becoming increasingly addicted to opioids. Remember the pill mill era. You know, it's funny. I decided I wasn't going to give a speech today, but here I am giving a speech, so I apologize. But the pill mills happened. Florida was very, very liberal back in 2005, 2010. They didn't regulate pill mills. They didn't regulate these clinics that were providing unfettered access to opioids, benzodiazepines, Valiums, and others. If you were a doctor, or if you were a business person, you hired a doctor, which happened a lot, kids would come in, you'd see lines. I saw this too. You'd see lines outside the strip mall where the kids and adults, young adults were coming to get their pills, often from other parts of the state or country. And Aronberg had a big hand in shutting down the pill mills around 2010, 2011. But the law of unintended consequences, which has happened throughout this insurance scheme, kicked in. So prescription opioids started to dry up a little bit. Fentanyl wasn't quite here yet. It was minor. And heroin was cheap back in 2010 compared to a diverted 30 Percocet stolen from, you know, somebody comes to see me and says, I need 30 Percocet. Then they leave and they hand it to their partner in crime. Happened all the time, not to me, but I'm sure it happened some. So now heroin kicked in. Then along comes fentanyl, fully synthetic. You don't need to grow it. You don't need a poppy flower. You don't need supposedly a drug cartel to make it. So fentanyl, fully synthetic, supposedly sent over from China, maybe in the beginning, but eventually they just sent the byproducts or the components of fentanyl down to Mexico where the cartels would make it. And then our southern border being what it was, kind of porous for drugs that you could put in a salt shaker like this, fentanyl, enough to kill about 10,000 people. That's how potent it is. So it's it remains very hard to identify fentanyl when it's either made locally or made in Mexico. So that whole opioid epidemic, followed by opening up the gates for people with addiction, and now there were a lot of them to be treated as a disability with lifetime benefits. Now we're in the fentanyl era. Here it is, 2025. Palm Beach County, last time they looked, 92% of the opioid overdose deaths in Palm Beach County recently are from fentanyl. The insurance companies are still paying for addiction treatment. The patient brokers, even though 100 of them have gone to jail, probably like the Taliban, for every 100 of those that went to jail, now there's probably 300 that are out there still working. And they've gotten a little smarter, maybe, but they're still going to jail. So here we are with the need for information that's in this book to be read by people, learned by people, even though most of what's in here you could get online, so that parents up north that are trying to decide, what do I do with my kid who's got clearly a drug problem, committing crimes for money, got new friends because they ditched their other ones because they weren't like-minded, not working, maybe because they're, supporting themselves through part of the scheme. And here we are in 2025 trying to just keep ahead of this process. And Zach asked me when I first came here today if we are playing catch up. That's what he asked. Are we playing catch up with this problem? And again, other than Mika's medical correspondent, I'm not an addiction treatment doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I just have had to learn a lot about this and and have some family interest in it because of my brother dying, but mostly I just realized this is an important social topic. So are we playing catch up in 2025? Not exactly, but the problem hasn't gone away. And figuring out where to have your loved family member go for treatment is still kind of tricky. It's not transparent when you're looking on websites or social media or looking for things to look for to figure out, especially if you're a novice at this as a parent, let's say, or a family member, where do I send my son or daughter? How do I keep them alive? And getting that information out, even though it's not perfect, is still in large part something that I think will be good if it comes out of this book. And we're on 2025, just kind of waiting to see what will happen next. Will the opioid and drug overdose rate creep back up? We're seeing that young kids are increasingly likely, if they die from an overdose on an opioid, to die solely from fentanyl, which 10 years ago was not the case. And all these overlapping drugs with cocaine and meth and fentanyl and regular old pain pills, they're not even the hugest problem right now in the youth in the United States in the last year or so. It's fentanyl, counterfeit fentanyl tablets. And they're everywhere, everywhere. I had a colleague maybe 6-8 years ago, a spine surgeon in Vero, name's Johnny Benjamin. And I can say that because he's in federal prison now for making counterfeit Percocet in his garage. He's my age, a little younger. Pill stamping machine, making Percocets that looked like Percocet from his fentanyl salt shaker, which, you know, you guys know how difficult it would be to properly calibrate something where a couple grains of it, if you double it, it's lethal. So I actually don't know if he killed anybody, but he got caught with like a bag full of this counterfeit stuff that he had made. And yeah, he'll be spending a lot of time in federal prison, has already been there for at least 5 or 6 years. That stuff's not going away. And so if you are parents or grandparents or kids that know other people who have problems like this, it's frustrating. It's easy to look away if it's not your direct family member. It's easy to blame the person with the addiction, calling it a moral failing or a problem of character, or whatever you want to call it. These people are hard to be around when they have a full-blown severe substance use disorder. They'll steal your house blind. They'll rob whatever medicines are in your medicine cabinet. Everything has to be in lock and key. And they can die the next day from an overdose. So it means the ability to be compassionate for family members who are going through this, and it's often a chronic problem. It's not like happens yesterday and how do I be nice to Johnny or Jane? It's a chronic problem. And I'm sure the domestic turmoil that comes from this is just profound. And we heard it from all the people that we interviewed through this process. Dave Aronberg had it firsthand. And trying to find answers to difficult problems can be difficult. Does anybody have any questions? I broke my promise of not giving a lecture, and I just did. So I want to see if anybody thinks of something that I didn't mention. Yes, ma'am.
This is my first question.
Okay.
First of all,
Here's my lecture notes.
Okay, sure.
Here's my other lecture notes. Haven't looked at them yet, of course.
I'm sorry for your loss, and thank you very much for making this information so accessible. I'll share it. And my question is about fentanyl. Does it have a place in medicine? I understand that it does. And should it be eradicated? Is there a replacement so that fentanyl can go away?
No, fentanyl is not going away.
It's not going away.
So you have, and fentanyl is key in medicine, key in anesthesia, and it's in cancer treatment. It's here to stay. That's pharmaceutical grade, legal fentanyl. And there are like 6 or 7 ways you can take fentanyl. It's IV and anesthesia. You ever see those guys with the lollipops hanging out of their mouth back 10 years ago? That was a submucosal brand of fentanyl. You can put a little patch under like Copenhagen. You could stick it under your tongue, pills. But once it becomes illicitly manufactured fentanyl, which is cheap, which every cartel in Mexico is making and sending up here in some form or fashion, you can take it however you want. You can burn it and smoke it and take a pill. I'm sure people have injected it. I think my brother died from cutting up my mother's transdermal fentanyl. She had horrible cancer of the head and neck. And when we found him, this is 9 years ago, he had these little pieces of fentanyl patch cut up by his bed, but he was dead. And my mom was in the hospital in Miami having some cancer surgery. Nobody was home except the dog. So there's a lot of ways to misuse fentanyl and other drugs, but because it's so potent and because there's so much illicit, illegally manufactured fentanyl out there, doing away with it in medical use is pointless because that's not where most of it's being diverted from. It's not like it's under lock and key in the hospital or the pharmacy, but that's not being stolen anymore. There, I mean, you guys probably don't know, but they have these big machines now they're computer programmed. If you want a fentanyl patch or any other drug, you see the nurse in there typing it in, and it pops out like a vending machine, sort of. So that stuff's not being diverted like it maybe was 10 years ago. But so stopping fentanyl isn't stopping illicitly manufactured fentanyl. It's just would do nothing. And it might have this unintended consequence that who knows what would happen if they did that in medicine, which I've never heard anybody suggest that they're trying to do that. Mika.
So you said that Dave Aronberg has testified a lot. Are there any solutions to the Florida shop?
Yes. The solutions in the grand scheme of things, the solutions are to tweak some of the federal laws, to slightly change some of the federal laws, and to change the payment system within the addiction treatment industry. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, Aronberg, who is the politician, and I'm not, but Aronberg has said over and over again, and he's said this to Congress, he wants the Americans with Disabilities Act to be better explained so that a sober home can feel, so you're not empowering sober homes to hide in the dark of night and avoid registration because they have a, quote, disabled person in the home. And under the Affordable Care Act and the Mental Health Parity Act, if you have a drug addiction, you are disabled. You have protections from being abused by other people or the government if you have a disability. There's probably a ramp out there if you're in a wheelchair. If you have a substance use disorder, you have a disability. So Aronberg would like to, and has told Congress, please clarify the ADA, maybe he said, and I don't know how this is going to happen, but he would like to see the payment system changed from fee for service. I do your laminectomy, I get paid for doing a laminectomy. If I went to the Cleveland Clinic, where friends of ours have been, or if I'm in the VA, it's not fee for service as much, especially the VA. It's you're getting paid a salary per year. You have to practice with quality metrics and be a good healthcare provider, but you're not incentivized to do more procedures to make more money. That's how it is in most healthcare arenas right now, including in behavioral health, particularly in substance use disorder treatment. So if Aronberg would like to see that changed. I think that's a hard one to change, but I think he's right that if it happened to change where you have an outcome-based payment, that would help maybe to lower the incentive, the perverse incentives that can take somebody who is already crooked or make somebody who doesn't know that they shouldn't be crooked, take away the incentive. There's a huge problem that may have to do with the answer to your question. Also, it's now crystal clear that short-term acute treatment for opioid use disorder doesn't work nearly as well as very long de-escalated treatment, say for a year. They've looked at a breakpoint of 30 days. So you go into 30 days, if you get less than 30 days of treatment, which is typical in the insurance industry, your chance of relapsing, reusing drugs, going to the emergency department, getting arrested is like 4 or 5 times higher than if you're in a year-long program, or anything over 30 days. So insurance companies have trouble paying for that. They don't know. They don't know how to pay for that. But if they did, it would disincentivize the crooks from wanting to be involved in a system that's not paying very well. So, and we already know that the outcomes are better, less overdose, less relapse, less trips to the ER. If you're in treatment for a long time versus a short acute burst of detox and Suboxone and buprenorphine and Narcan for a couple weeks, and then go to the sober home for a few more weeks, and then you're done. They give you $50, go buy a cup of coffee, and then if you happen to be with a patient broker finding you one of these kids, or if you've done it before and you're already complicit in the Florida Shuffle. And that's a question that's hard to ask. I'll bet nobody asks it, and I don't have a good answer. What do you do if the kids are already complicit? They've done this a couple times. Are they victims? Are they, they don't get arrested because they're the ones with the brain disease, but it's part of the problem. If they could figure that out, what do we do with the young adults who have terrible brain disease so that they get better? They're studying it. Yes, sir.
Did you, in your evaluations, look into methadone treatment centers?
Methadone?
Yes.
Yeah, methadone's been around for a long time. So in the old days, methadone clinics were just that. In the new days, methadone, because it is trickier, it's one of the 3 drugs that are used in typical inpatient treatment. Methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone. They each have different actions. Methadone just requires, both by law and medically, to have a little bit more intensive treatment. Buprenorphine, they hand you a lollipop or a sublingual and you can go away as long as you have Narcan. So, although, with my research, you asked me, it seems to me that methadone is still around. It's still not uncommon. And it is one of the important 3 drugs that are still used. And
Did you see it in the shuffle?
no,
So there.
I'm not sure I would have seen it though, but I didn't see it.
Because the question in my mind is, it's probably a very effective long-term treatment.
Right.
People stay in it for a long time.
Right.
There are not a lot of easy answers to come off of it. And if you do, it takes a lot of help.
Right.
So it's a setup for the potential of use. And we're merely supporting it because of its probable long-term effect for the majority of people.
Right.
But it is an area that could be used in abuse.
If I'm correct, it's still all about money. Most of what I've talked about so far has to do with greed, the flow of money, and the willingness for either the insurance companies or the government to support it financially. So I don't think methadone is going away, but it's a little more cumbersome to get methadone treatment. And last time I checked, they don't just hand you a methadone bottle or prescription and say, go away, come back in 30 days. They can do that with buprenorphine. And naltrexone, which is one you don't hear a whole lot about, but it's a complete antagonist to opioids. So you've got methadone, which is an agonist, means it's like any other OxyContin, but it's very long acting. And then you've got this buprenorphine, kind of newer, very popular. It's a partial blocker of those opioid receptors in your brain. Then you take naltrexone, it stops everything, just like Narcan, naloxone. So the reason that they won't, last I checked, hand you a bottle of methadone and say, come back in 30 days is the risks seem to be too high and it's just not happening. But it's a popular drug still for inpatient care. Yes.
You can overdose on it as well, whereas with the Suboxone, at 32 milligrams, I think it is, you can take it home if your kid gets it at home. It's not great, but they're not going to kill it. It's not going to kill it.
Right, because
so methadone, you have to go to the clinic to get it.
Right.
Just for my question, if half of the people are relapsing anyway, and you've got plenty of people who need to go to treatment without getting in touch with the broker, without being sent over with money to get drugs to qualify.
right.
In my experience, I was an addictions counselor at a big rehab in Maryland for 10 years.
So I automatically apologize for anything I've said so far today.
But I mean, my experience was that
Yeah.
there's plenty of people who are relapsing when they go there anyway, because if they're treated for 30 days, as you said,
Yeah.
they go there and they're still craving.
Yeah.
So what I can see over my 10 years, I began to believe that Suboxone maintenance was the thing to do, because in countries where it's available and
Yeah.
even the statistics show it keeps people alive. So the ideal thing would be put someone on the Suboxone when they leave the treatment center, they're no longer craving, they have the blocker in there so they can't overdose. And they're alive, and with any luck, they'll get some kind of a program. And then it is, as that gentleman said, it's difficult to get off the Suboxone because you become physically dependent on it.
Right.
But you can taper off of it, whatever you call that term, to get it, and that's the ideal thing, to get a program and get yourself together.
Yeah.
And then gradually reduce that, rather than leaving treatment after 30 days, still craving no program. And that's when people overdose, because if they try and get opiates, it's hard to get clean ones.
Yeah, and
Because the fentanyl's everywhere.
it is everywhere. And the number of people who have the benefit of either going on Suboxone in any of these 16,000 treatment facilities in the US or staying on it after they leave is surprisingly low.
They start to do it at Hazelden and Betty Ford.
Yeah.
When they had 3 or 4 people die of overdose after the 30-day treatment a few years back.
Yeah.
And I think that it's getting more popular, but my place that I work still uses the Suboxone to withdraw people for 4 or 5 days, then they stay for 30 days or a little longer. And
Still on Suboxone at that point?
No.
No, okay.
Because they still think that people can be drug-free, and they give them, I guess the naltrexone is the injection that blocks cravings.
Correct.
But you can still overdose when you're on naltrexone,
Correct.
which happens So it's a big controversy in the field. Should we have medically assisted methadone or Suboxone, which seems to be about the only thing that keeps people alive statistically? Or should we still be trying to figure out how to get people well? I agree that a year would be great. That would be the smart thing to do. Or 6 months, or even 3 months.
Anything more than 30 days. Yes.
I'm very naive on this subject, but why are these Mexican cartels making fentanyl so that it will kill you? Isn't the idea to keep your customer? I mean,
Okay.
What, why are these drugs so horrible?
If you use that logic, which I can understand the question, believe it or not, if you're thinking about some normal market-driven economy, the problem is there's a couple million people using it and only 80,000 died last year. There's still a lot more that are there to use it. And a really strange thing, I heard this more than once, you've heard this. If you're a crooked drug dealer, since I've been investigating this, if you have a few people die because your heroin or fentanyl was stronger than it was supposed to be, you become very popular very quickly, perversely, because people think that's the good stuff. I'm going to go buy it from that person now. That's hard to imagine, but again, this perverse market-driven schemes that are out there.
Why millions? I don't understand. I mean, when I was growing up, nobody talked about being in pain and needing drugs. Who are these millions of people that need pain pills?
If you were from France, like the one person I spoke to, the doctor, if you have back pain in France, take some wine and sit in a hot bath. That's what I was told they would do in France. I'm sure that was a bunch of baloney, but that's what I heard.
Can I just answer that question real quick?
Yes, sir, please.
100 patients a month for 10 years. It's just like people saying that when you're 13, you're going to try a beer or you're going to take a puff of pot. Now people say, here, have a pill.
Right.
And it's not about having pain, it's about getting high and peer pressure and bad judgment when you're a kid. And I used to make fun of Nancy Reagan when she said,
just say no.
She said no, but actually, if you're a person who has a certain type of brain chemistry,
right,
genetic predisposition, and you try one of those drugs, there's a chance that that's the death knell for you. Like 10 years later, you're going to be, or whatever. Yeah. So the idea that if you even tried it, for 15% of the population, they'll get addicted.
Right.
The other 85% can drink, the other 85%. Right. People can use heroin without getting it. But certain people can't.
Right. Sure.
I had a couple of questions. With the people that are on fentanyl now, are they taking it because they have an addiction and they are craving and they can't avoid it, or are they taking it to get high?
Not the latter so much.
Well, that's what I would have thought.
Yeah, it's the addiction has these 4 C's attached to it. Cravings is one of them, compulsion, control, and once a tolerance has been built up for a lot of medicine, opiates in particular, alcohol is another one like that, but opioids in particular, the buzz that you might expect that a person would get is not the reason that they're trying to use the drug again. It's so they don't feel sick, because they feel like crap if they are without a drug and maybe early into the relapse. It probably depends on the drug a little bit and the severity of the use, but they don't want to get high. They just don't feel like being sick, dope sick.
And then the other question I had, years ago, I'm not sure if it's still the case, you would hear about these doctors and pill mills and signing going in a prescription and what have you. Yeah. Are those still in existence, or are most drugs now from legal means on the street or wherever, as opposed to getting a prescription?
Yeah, pill mills in Florida were reasonably effectively dealt with, and I suspect that that's across the country now, because the prescription drug monitoring program was put in place in many, many states around 2010, 2011. And I think the very last state to incorporate it has done so. So now if you go to a doctor's office or an emergency room or a clinic of any sort, and everything's electronic now too. You can't even write, you can hardly write a prescription anymore. You can't phone one in. That's been for a long time. So you have to go into this prescription drug monitoring program website in your state. In Florida, I think it's called Force something. And you have to do that first before you can give the prescription or phone in the prescription or type it in for the person in front of you. That rather effectively got rid of pill mills in Florida and probably elsewhere. Thus the transition first to heroin and now sadly to fentanyl, which is cheap and everywhere in the United States right now.
So I have another question. I read an article, and maybe you can speak to this too over there, in the Washington Post about 30 years ago, and it said, drugs are the fifth food group. Like people crave a desire to escape or to have an altered state of feeling. I mean, do you have any comment on that?
I'll tell you my answer and then I want yours, because I was looking at TikTok yesterday, which that is the only social media I do. And I'll watch the little clips. I like the movies, I like the fishing and the bears. But there was a rabbi talking about that question. And this rabbi rather effectively was pointing out that the drug's not the problem, the drug is being used to numb the person to the problems that they're actually having. The emotional dilemma, the sadness, the loneliness, the trauma.
That same guy answering, and that's the way the field is moving, is that trauma is the problem, addiction is the solution.
That's right.
And then
the TikTok rabbi.
And then,
Yeah.
so the people who are more apt to become addicted are people who are uncomfortable in their own skins, is the way
Yep.
the rabbi said it. And if you feel bad in your own skin, you can have a puff upon it. Your ADD, some ADD kids, they have a puff upon it, and all of a sudden the brains work better for a while.
Yeah.
Or, there's all kinds of ways. People like the drug that fixes their particular brain chemistry.
Right.
A lot of people don't like downs, they like us. Other people,
Right.
so you get addicted to speed instead of heroin.
Yes, ma'am.
I think touching on the question of pain is helpful, both for emotional pain and physical pain. And I've been trying to understand what role declaring pain as a fifth vital sign, I think is the phrase that's used, so that now we have to point to how much pain we have and it has to be treated. So some of the young people we're now recovered, but in the world, the great perverse world of drug addiction, have explained to us how they got things by claiming pain. And when, is that true? Was that part of the federal legislations that led to unintended consequences? We wanted to help people, but having lived in France for a number of years, that's more true than you imagine, because it's real about how many of us experience our pain, and most of us don't need OxyContin or our pain.
Thankfully, the fifth vital sign doesn't exist anymore by law, but I will tell you, in my document, when I stopped practicing last year after 35 years, and that ruling went away maybe 20 years ago. It's a long time ago. People, but everybody still fills out their little smiley face and puts a number on their pain. That's still across the board, just not mandated anymore. And the reason it's not is that there was an uproar, and in part the uproar 20 years ago was that Purdue Pharma had given this dramatic grant to the American Pain Society, who then advocated to some federal agency to do this fifth vital sign, and they did it, and then after a couple of years, they undid it. Interesting, though, that yeah. I had a nurse, this is probably unrelated to the question, but nurses are hard on doctors at night and with patients who have pain. And they still believe, and rightfully so, because they're generally more compassionate than the hard-ass surgeon who's not. But I can't tell you the number of times I would get called, it's always after 5 p.m., from a patient who wants more pain medicine, and I'm probably the one who inflicted the harm on them to cause them to be in that post-surgical pain typically. But I remember when I first started practicing in the hospital I was born in, so this would have been 1992-ish, Good Sam Hospital. I didn't know anything about how many times I should be called at night for patients complaining of pain after their laminectomy or their cervical, whatever. This one time, the nurse that was calling me was diverting the Demerol, because that's what we used in the 90s, and taking it, maybe using it, I don't really know. And my patients, after some horrendous fusion operation, were in horrible pain. Yeah, hell yeah, because the Demerol that I prescribed was not going into the bag. Now, that's probably an unusual phenomenon. You guys see, Netflix series on that and whatnot. I think it's Bad Nurse, isn't it? So, but the fifth vital sign fortunately went away, supposedly, but and it's subjective. It's not an objective vital sign like all the other 4 ones are. But I'd love to say it went away. It's just not mandated now.
I've had interesting conversations with nurses in dentist offices who say, here's what you can take, but I'll tell you, you'll heal faster with the less that you take.
Yep. Fortunately, every doctor in the country now realizes that the best way to prescribe opioid pain medicine, if you have to, if there are no, at first try not to, use multimodal treatments with Novocaine and Advil and counseling and patient education, but start at the lowest dose possible, the lowest schedule possible, and build up if you need to, and ideally you don't need to. All right. Yes, sir.
Just a couple of comments. I'm a psychiatrist, and everything you said is very true.
Okay, thank you.
But here in the state of Maine, I serve on a committee that looks over the opioid deaths. And we're currently averaging somewhere between 9 and 12 a week. Now that is down from 14 to 20 a week back in. And the amazing thing is, just to give people context, those patients who do die from overdose death, they have an average of 4 substances in their bloodstream in their body. So again, we can pick on fentanyl, and we should. We should also know that there's now carfentanil, which is 100 times more potent than the regular fentanyl. And so to the question about, can we get rid of it? And that more potent one is good for the people who actually need it, because they can take less and, probably have it last for longer periods of time. The other thing I wanted to say was with methadone, as you say, it is a full agonist. There are licensed federal programs. There are 4 in Bangor. There are none in Hancock County. But the amazing thing is, because it is a disability, just as you said, the federal government has said they cannot report that they are giving the methadone to that methadone clinic patient. So I, as a prescribing psychiatrist, even though I follow the state recommendation and the guideline as a good physician to check the prescription monitoring program, I have no way of knowing if they're in a registered.
So that it won't necessarily show up in
It cannot show up. The state of Maine would love it to show up, but we cannot do it because of the federal protection that they have as you use the term, they're protected as a disabled person.
Right.
And I think that's part of what your partner probably wanted to say. I mean, what chance do we have if we don't have all of the medication put before us when we query it?
Right.
Medicaid, doesn't that cover a lot of rehab for some of the populations that you're talking about? And with cuts on the horizon, what's going to happen, do you suppose, to those who need treatment of any kind? Hopefully it's outside of the shuffle, but
It will be horrible from what I have now learned and thought in general also. The one big beautiful bill over the next something like 6 years is predicted to cut 10 or 20 million people from the Medicaid rolls. And there's different kinds of Medicaid. You can be poor or you can be disabled. And if you have Social Security or Social Security disability, I mean, it's kind of convoluted, but it's definitely going to cut a lot out of people out. The work rules that they have in place are going to be onerous, even though the majority of it's not as big a problem as I understand it to be. But once they cut Medicaid, once people are not insured and can't get private health insurance and aren't on Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid, then their access to treatment will disappear because nobody can afford, especially somebody that was on Medicaid, to go to addiction treatment. I actually don't know. I didn't talk to anybody in all of my interviews or discussions who went and paid cash. Maybe at the Betty Ford Clinic 30 years ago, they did that, but not now. So it's going to be catastrophic.
And what role, nefarious role, are the insurance companies playing? And is anyone looking at that and going to address that?
Yeah. Right. The Affordable Care Act, one of the provisions of the Affordable Care Act was what's called the 80-20 rule, or the medical loss ratio. Does anybody know about this in the room, you guys? Yeah, so the medical loss ratio, generally speaking, is an insurance company gets a premium. They're mandated to spend 80% of it on healthcare services and 20% on administrative costs, which includes profit, but the word profit is not in the law, but clearly it's on this side of the equation. This was a pet peeve for my co-author, by the way, this medical loss ratio. And he actually did several of the interviews and knew a lot about it, as you guys probably do also. But it's a strange, perverse incentive. If you're an insurance company and you're allowed by law to increase your premium, as long as you're competitive with the other insurance companies and you don't want to lose big contracts because your premiums are too high. If you want your profit to go up, the 80% has to go up. So you have to be more willing to pay for the healthcare services that was provided, even if your fraud division wants to investigate because it's crazy and claw back some of that money after the fact. But if this is correct, and a lot of experts say that it's a strange incentive to go ahead and pay for these services because you don't want to screw around with a disabled person and have a federal lawsuit. You don't want to have too many bad ratings on your website. And you don't want to lose contracts with big payers, big employers. So they'll pay and then increase the premium, and then their 20% can go up. I don't have any personal knowledge that that happens, but there are experts who say that it does.
You know the medical loss ratio for Medicaid nationwide.
I do not.
I have heard that it is much less than 20% for that. I mean, when people were willing to talk about a single payer system,
Yeah.
National health insurance, they were saying if we would have everyone enrolled under the same program, that could drop to, the numbers I heard were 92% of each, or 92 cents on the dollar would go for medical services, 8 cents on the dollar went to oversee it. But of course, if you've got an industry like the insurance industry, which is the 4th largest industry in this country, who's going to want to support that or give donations for the next group of politicians who are going to decide whether we go with a single payer system?
Right. Sir.
As you can probably tell, I have some experience with a single payer system.
Yes, you do. The accent gives it away.
It's not all it's called. If you have an acute problem, you will be treated. Break your hip with a new hip in a day or 2 days. Need a new hip? Well, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years?
Canes are cheaper than total hip replacement.
Absolutely. And you know, I don't feel the pain, so why should I worry about somebody that does?
Yeah.
And so that everything about healthcare and so on is perverse in one way or another. And there are lots of reasons why it's good to do this or it's bad to do, depending on where you are in the whole program. But as you said, most insurance companies, although they deny certain things, they have no choice but to approve certain things, which may not be, shouldn't be approved. But you know, so there's a lot of perversity out there.
Yeah.
And there is no perfect system, unless the best system is to have good genes and not be sick. And I recognize it.
Yeah, you know what I find really horrendous about this discussion and what you're saying and what I'm thinking is, if we compare the incentives for a hip replacement where your brain is functioning okay, presumably, you're not with a brain disease caused either, as the rabbi says, as the rabbi, who saw the rabbit? You did. Because of trauma or emotional issues that you need to numb. But if your brain is diseased by the chemical, your ability to withstand those cravings and compulsions and obsessions and crazy behavior that makes you do things that you would otherwise never do aren't there. And if you're young and you're insured and somebody takes advantage of that for money, that's, in my mind, of course, I'm an orthopedic surgeon, caveat, far worse than being talked into getting a hip replacement. If you have a sound mind and body, you just have a bad hip. Hip replacement, interestingly, is the most effective, best operation in orthopedic surgery. Maybe laminectomies are close, but it's always been hip replacement, and it still is. Yes, Zach, we done?
About at time.
Okay.
But thank you so much, Dr. Campbell.
Pleasure.
And please hang around afterwards if you'd like to chat.